beginnings, and now we have Jacob's Pillow as a landmark preservation.
Yeah, well,
You know, the main thing is, I think we'd like to find out more about how this all developed and how the two of you, first of all, I think you were involved with bringing the
well, yeah, actually,
event for that anniversary.
let's say that as Ron was talking about beginnings, the beginnings of it were that we decided in 1982, which was the 50th anniversary of the Pillow, wouldn't it be great to get the men dancers back there? Well, thinking back on it, I think we had that idea in June of 1982, and we wrote to the men dancers. You know, there was...
You knew where they all were?
I knew where all of them but one were. And so I wrote them letters. I remember taking these packets to the post office and mailing all this stuff out. Like a few weeks before we wanted to have this event, and asked them to come on their own dime. Some of them came from California. The Delmars were in California, and Frank Overlees was in California. They got themselves there. We arranged for places for them to stay and gave them hospitality, but they basically got themselves there. They all said yes, and they all came. And of course, the most amazing part of it, because there had been a reunion once before in 1957 for the 25th anniversary of the company, but the difference between that and 1982 was there was no camera crew in 1957. So there's a photograph of them there, but I'm struck by how crucial it is, of course, to document. And to the reason that we can all sit here today and see this is because Ron, with no funding and just the hope to maybe do something, brought a crew up there and started recording these guys reminiscing.
Well, which leads me to ask, I think you were involved with the first film we saw, the Lubavitch film.
That's correct.
Isn't that how this led into it?
That's right. That was my introduction and my first time ever to the Pillow. And needless to say, I was just, you know, I couldn't believe there was such a place where there was a community of dancers and immersion of dance, and it just was really overwhelming. So I actually came back the same summer, which Norton reminded me, because we're starting to go back through some other old art. There's so many films or segments of this work that never got really utilized. To back up, the origin of this project was the 50th anniversary of Jacob's Pillow. We went up there to basically make kind of an overview film about Jacob's Pillow. And in the course of making that film, Norton had invited these men dancers back. And when that weekend occurred, it was clear that the focus of the film was really going to be the men dancers. And needless to say, it was so compelling to listen and to get the stories of these men coming back and for this reunion. So,
did you know they were going to be this articulate? They are quite
and funny.
They're just great.
The spirit of them seeing each other again after all that time. I mean, that's what really comes through in the film. And none of these were. I mean, you know, these were not set up shots. They really were. Ron was trailing them, and they were just experiencing being together again and telling these stories.
Well, it's almost like they had never been apart. In the sense that
well, I think it's clearly a point in time in their lives, a coming of age, when not only did they have a focus, and I think, you know, the fact that it was the depression, and as they said to me, you know, we had nothing else to do. But, you know, I think we all can look back in our lives where we had a point in time, especially when you're in your 20s, when you're very focused around a particular energy or task as they were. And obviously Ted Shawn. I mean, the other thing that I was clearly wanted to chronicle is, as I said earlier, the tenacity of Ted Shawn was amazing. I mean, this guy had a vision and just the doggedness to do this. And I think so much of what the film, other than what the men explains to us about the day in the life of living at the Pillow, was centered around Shawn's ambitions of really having an agenda to do this. So it was a point. It was a special time in history, and that's what made the film so special.
Absolutely. And that's what led to your next film.
Well, not
directly.
exactly.
Not directly. But
Yeah. I mean, actually.
Never Stand Still, I'm referring to.
Yeah, I mean, the way those two films somewhat segue is the initial film I wanted to make, the 50th anniversary film about the Pillow, was going to be a bigger scope film using many more companies, etc. And although we started shooting that film, and we're starting, as I said earlier, looking at that footage that we're now realizing what to do with. But the point is, I took a pretty long hiatus. I mean, I worked in some other dance here in the city, but I really got involved professionally on other projects, doing a lot of TV work. And it was the 75th anniversary that at the time Ella Bath was the artistic director, and I basically said, you know, I never made this big scope film about the Pillow. Now that it's 75th, let's do it. And she definitely supported that concept, and that's really how the Never Stand Still evolved. So I finally got to go back and make a kind of a bigger frame film about the Pillow. Yeah.
Right. But now, what was the shoot like? How long did you have to do the men who danced?
Well, we again, we were up there for a good part of the summer, but it was really the weekend that they had their reunion that we concentrated on, and I think
that was just a couple of days.
That was just a couple of days,
yeah.
Exactly.
They seem so prepared to share.
Well, they've been preparing for their whole lives, and then it was, as you hear in the film, and in particularly from Fred Hearn when he tears up at that moment, saying, it didn't get to me until that moment I walked through the door. I mean, obviously the sense of place is very powerful there, and them coming back together in that moment was very powerful for them, and they knew it was the only time. I mean, Barton had come back at various other times, but for the other men, I mean, I'm grateful that I got to know them at that point, and we continued to correspond after that. They're all gone now, and that was the only time that they all came back, or even that any of them individually came back other than Barton. So it was very palpable for them to be on site again, and being in those places, those buildings that they had built with their own hands, and of course very rewarding for them to see all of the thousands of people there enjoying it.
They must have been stunned.
Yeah.
And
the other thing that I think comes across, it was so obvious that we could take a license with the location, because the Pillow obviously has evolved and changed physically, but in many cases it hasn't. So it was really extraordinary to place these men in the same location, decades later. And we, I enjoyed making that juxtaposition between the before and after, if you will, of those images. The other thing I'd like to make mention, in the course of working in this film, all the archival footage of the men dancers was silent films. I mean, Shawn, again, was such a visionary that even though he didn't have sync sound, and he would pull out this old hand-cranked camera and shoot the men. And very often these films were not a constant frame rate. These old cameras were spring wound, and they would run at various frames per second. They would start out at 24 frames and crank down to 16 and then 12 with 8 frames. And so technically there were some challenges there. But what I'm leading up to is the whole time I was working on this film, the Men Dancers, we were working with silent films. And one of the great things that came out of this was a couple years later, when Jess Meeker was still alive, Norton got some dollars from the National Endowment of the Arts, and we went back and we synchronized with Jess's compositions and playing, and we recorded Jess playing the piano and synchronized it back to silent films. So that is really extraordinary to listen to now this work with synchronized sound.
Are there
I should say music.
Are there outtakes that
Well, the films exist we have hours of that footage now. It's all at the New York Public Library and also at Jacob's Pillow to be seen. And thank goodness we were able to do that, as Ron said, during Jess's lifetime, because he was the only one who knew how it all went together. Some of his scores he had never actually written down. He always played them live. He knew them in his head. So when it came to knowing how the movement fit with the music, it was only Jess who knew how to do that. And he had trained playing the piano for silent films, so he knew how to play to a fixed image, which was a great skill. And of course, he said it was made easier by the fact that Shawn's choreography tended to have a movement for a note. You know, things sort of went together in a certain way. But yeah, of course, all of this goes back to when we talk about the importance of Shawn's tenacity and so forth, but also Shawn's zeal to make sure it was documented. And if you think during the Depression, when they barely had 2 nickels to rub together, and had to, as you heard about, worry about what they were going to eat, the fact that they were spending any money at all on film stock to make sure they were recording these films, the dances, is really extraordinary.
So that was Shawn's
that was Shawn, making sure, yeah.
For preservation of the, yeah. Well, speaking of which, you're director of preservation.
Yeah.
Now, the Pillow and have been for some time.
Well, and of course, all of the footage that you see in The Men Who Dance, all of the archival footage, was stuff that I knew where it was. I knew how to access all of that. Though even at the time, again speaking about beginnings, I was not the archivist then. My title was associate manager. There was no archivist. There was no, I was drawn to it because of, it was compulsion, I guess.
It was destiny.
I felt like it needed to be seen. And so, my role as director of preservation didn't begin until about a decade after this. Officially. But I was the keeper of the flame. I was the one who knew where all of the photos were and the films, and wanted to share it.
And it just grew and expanded to today's remarkable.
The other thing I want to make a comment on is 30 years ago, the video equipment we were using was pretty primitive. I mean, the cameras were huge, and you'll also notice in low light situations they're not that good. So I look back on making this, and there were no computers, there were no nonlinear editing didn't exist. We edited on 3/4-inch videotape, and I remember the work print of this film. When you work in the edit room, you use time code to indicate where the frames are in the film. And back in the day, we would just record over and over again as we made edits. So there were points when the film or the rough cut was so many generations down that you could barely make out the images. So it was very archaic.
We've come a long way.
Well, technology's come a long way,
right.
certainly.
Yeah.
I think how we work today it's amazing, because we can pull up, as we editors out there know, we can put huge amounts of footage into a computer, we can label it, we can pull it up in any way we want, and synchronize stuff. If back when this film was being made, when we were putting in, for example, a voiceover, if the voiceover was 5 minutes, it took 5 minutes to put it in. There was no such thing as a digital file where you just dropped it in and you were done. So it was a very different time for filmmaking.
Well, I'm going to turn it over to, but I had one question, just
Yes.
wondering how much time you spend looking at dance live and how much time on film? Or do both of you keep up with?
Oh,
As
well,
I
would love to say that all I do all day is look at our video archives, but unfortunately that's not the case. What I love.
What is a typical day? What?
Well, all kinds of requests from all over, and which we try to make sure of, and we have a website now called Jacob's Pillow Dance Interactive, which is a place where we can share some of the riches from the archives. So we continue to add things all the time. All of this is available on our website, and so I do look at it an awful lot in the service of choosing the selections that we're going to put on that. There are hundreds of excerpts of things that are available, and I still see a lot live because we're documenting, of course, everything that we do going forward. From the point of time of this reunion, 1982, was when we started videoing every performance at the Pillow. So from 1982 to present, we have virtually every program, not every single performance. There are several performances in a run, but we have every program that has been performed there in those past 30, 40 years.
So people can come and look.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Examples. Well, I was just going to add an example of some of the footage. Again, going back to technology, when this film was made, it was shot not only in 3/4-inch video, which is a kind of a video cassette format, but we also used 1-inch videotape, which is a reel-to-reel, very like a 60-pound machine that they called portable, but it recorded a very good signal. It was kind of state-of-the-art at the time. The point is, there were some 1-inch masters that we only recently gave back to Norton to get transferred, and one of the great moments we just watched only last week was there's a performance of Barton Mumma doing a piece, Oh Brother Sister Moon, which was Shawn's favorite piece that he actually taught Barton to do, and it's the last performance of Barton dancing at Jacob's Pillow, doing this piece that Shawn choreographed. So it was really cool to see this.
Well, that would be great to see.
Yeah, and that was the summer of 1981, so that was the same summer as the Lara Lubovitch piece. A month after that, which also was something for us to remember, that it was that quickly that Ron was on top of things and was right back up at the Pillow shooting.
You're always at the right time, at the right place at the right time.
I don't know about that.
Seems like
we
you
tried.
Well, I'll take some questions if there are any. Let's see if I can see. I mean, there's so much to say about this film.
There's one in the back there.
Oh, there's one in the
Joanne.
back?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes?
I believe I went to the Pillow in about 1951, and I wonder, I don't know, I have so much papers at home, I wonder if I have any photos or programs.
Well, you go home and look.
If you have any, you know where to take them.
I can tell you we have lots of things from that period, and we're soon going to be, sometime this spring, we have digitized all of the performance programs from the Pillow's history, and those are going to be going online soon. So you can look through those and determine whether you were in fact there then.
Do you ever get calls or old memorabilia from people like
every day. But yes, by all means, I'll give you my card afterwards and we'll talk. But that's one of the great things about having been there over the years, and the fact that people do have those kinds of associations. And it happens all the time. And in fact, one thing to share that's related to this film, I haven't even told you this, Ron, but I'm still in touch with the family of Frank Overlees, who's the carrot ring guy.
American Indian, by the way.
Yeah. And this is the whole thing, but his sister was somebody who I knew as a child, which is very weird in terms of in Birmingham, Alabama. But at any rate, but his nephew just got in touch with me recently and said that they had Frank's route books from the 1930s, so he would record every every stop they made, every performance they made, and these are his original in pencil in these books, and he wants to make sure they come to the Pillow archives. So we're going to get together in a couple of weeks.
Those tours, as described in the film, are pretty amazing.
Extraordinary.
Yes, really. The footage of Richard Cragen doing Fetish.
Yeah.
Fetish, he says Fetish.
Fetish is what they said. And that was also, I was bringing back memories of talk about technology, because I was remembering, of course, he was still dancing in Stuttgart at that time. And it was Walter Terry had been in discussions with the writer. Walter Terry was talking with us about Shawn and St. Denis works that would be appropriate to restage that summer. And Walter suggested Fetish for Ricky to do, and then also Cynthia Gregory did Brahms' Waltz and Liebesdrama of Bruce St. Denis. And the way we had of communicating the dances to them at that time, we made a copy of the film, and I mean the film, an 8mm film that was then, we got a dub of that made, and I sent the film canister off to Germany to
Assured.
Yes, to Richard, and he looked at as much as he could before, so that when he came to the Pillow and had like a day or two with Barton, he then could work in the studio already having mastered something of the movement. But no YouTube.
No.
This was a film canister that got sent through the mail.
But it looks great in the film.
Yeah.
It's a very good sequence, because you see him really learning the subtlety of the head movements and all of that.
There's also this is available on DVD, I should say, and The Man Who Danced is. And when
it is?
And when Ron made a what anniversary was that? The 20th anniversary of The Man Who Danced, I guess.
Yeah.
But he cut a new mini documentary within that, showing Richard working on Pierrot in the Dead City, which was another Shawn work that Cragen learned at that time. So we see, there's more, and there's also some of the footage that we synchronized with Jess's playing the piano as part of the bonus items on that.
I was very worried about that piano.
Yeah. Nobody was harmed. No one was harmed in the making of this film.
No. Let's see, is there anybody else? Yes, I think. Yep.
So I was very interested in the integration of work in the dance that he had, and I know that the Kodo dancers in Japan have a similar work music, approach. And I was curious, in all the years, either at the Pillow or in the filmmaking, have you run across other performance art groups that integrated work or other activities into the creative process?
Did everybody hear that about integrating work into the dance process, the way you see it here?
Yeah, well, I'll just say that's a terrific quiz question, and I'm not. We have lots of things, and I can certainly think of things. Other companies who've done something integrating those sorts of movements. We do see a section, and of course, Labor Symphony was the piece that most associated that Shawn did, where he was literally taking the movements of working and putting them on the dance stage. So
they could have choreographed something of them actually working, doing all
pretty
those
much
chores.
could have. I'll get back to you on that.
But again, it's a good question, because it underscores as they say in the film, the complete immersion of living together, working together, traveling together, rehearsing together, and performing. So, this was the magic of this company. I mean, they had a theatrical, sensibility that was far better than perhaps their technical skill set.
I wonder how they chose the men, actually.
Well,
other than Barton, who
right.
did have training, whether he tried to get dancers who had training,
Yeah.
whether he just decided,
Well, Springfield College was a physical education school at that time, so the students that he had there were athletes. So, even though they talk about not being versed in, they were not trained dancers, but they were trained athletes, and so some of them being swimmers or long distance runners or whatever. And there was a great they made a piece in 1936 called Olympiad, which and that's what the footage of the basketball was from. They do there's fencing and there's decathlon and there's boxing, different sections, and that 1936 being an Olympic year, they were making it at that time. So, you know, they were really trying, you know, that was obviously a theme that they were making. And I will say there's a young dancer, Adam Weinert, who is on the program this summer at the Pillow, and he's been greatly inspired by Shawn and the Men Dancers. He actually has done some reconstructions himself, which will be featured in his programming, but he has been inspired to go back to that idea of work and wanted to actually start a garden at the Pillow so that he could kind of live through that again. So I think people still get inspiration from these ideas, which is a wonderful thing. And that's, of course, again, the power of having recorded it and being able to share it so that people can find new inspiration in it.
And you said the DVD is commercially available?
It is. It's available on the Pillow website for sure. So go to jacobspillow.org to find it.
And it's available on Amazon.com.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you, Liz. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks very much.